Well, you probably recognize this. This is the cart data that we were playing with in the last video. And I am just going to copy and paste this data into an Excel spreadsheet and then quickly run through with you what you need to do in order to present data appropriately. I don't have the column headings there, so flipping back, you'll see they were time, x position, y position, x velocity, y velocity. And in this particular instance, it is time and x position that we are interested in. And so those are the only two columns I want. I could have just copied those two and not the others, but sometimes you want a column near the beginning and a column near the end. And so if you have copied all of the columns across, just wanted to show you a super easy way of deleting whole columns in Excel. Just highlight the column by clicking the letter at the top, in this case the C above column C, and then it is Control and minus. We'll just remove that whole column. You can do columns more than one at a time. So if I now highlight C and D, it will do both of those. You can do columns that are non-adjacent. So if I hold the B, and then with a Mac, it's Command. Let's highlight columns that are not next to each other. In this case, these are the other two that I need to get rid of. So Control minus, and away they go. I do need a heading here, so I am going to insert a column. I got to that menu by doing my secondary click on that number 1 there. Insert. It puts a column in for me. So when you are doing, when you're presenting data, there are 3 things that you need to have in every column heading. The quantity you're measuring, in this case time. The symbol you're going to use to represent that later on, in this case T, and then finally the unit in which you are measuring it, so seconds. Same again here. This is displacement, and displacement is delta x. Now I can't do a delta symbol from my keyboard, so I'm just going to capital D for now. We'll change that in a second. Unit, small m, for meters. Oh, and I misspelled displacement. Displace, God Lord, meant. There we go. Let's make this whole thing a little bigger too. So that D should actually be a delta. I did D because D is the Roman alphabet equivalent of the Greek letter delta. And if you highlight a Roman letter and then change the font to symbol, it will change it to the Greek alphabet. So there we go, displacement delta xm. That works for all of the Roman letters. It will switch them to their Greek letter equivalents. All right, next problem is sig figs. Not enough here, way too many there. There is absolutely no way that we need to have precision down to the, a few billionths of a second there. That's just ludicrous, right? And also, if you look at displacement, that's that's centimeters, millimeters, tenths of millimeters, hundredths of millimeters, thousandths, 10,000s, hundreds, I can't say thousandth, millionths of a millimeter. Were we accurate to 1/1,000,000th of a millimeter when we were clicking those dots on that video screen? Well, of course we weren't. I would say that realistically, putting this data to the nearest centimeter would be much more sensible. And these little buttons here, those zeros with the arrows, those will increase or decrease your number of decimals. So we'll put that to the nearest centimeter. And with time, the general guide, hundredths are plenty good enough for what we're doing here. If you're measuring something with, say, a stopwatch, then you shouldn't even go to hundredths because human reaction time is tenths of seconds. So if you measured something with a stopwatch and you're quoting your data to 1,000th or even 100th of a second, that's just not realistic. So what else do we need to do? I'm going to put borders around this. These are just presentation things, but it's going to make it easier to interpret our data. And I'm also going to center it all. So there we go. We got some nice data. All right, next thing we're going to do is do a graph. If you don't know what kind of graph to insert, It's easy. XY scatter graph. If you think maybe it should be something else, think about it and then do an XY scatter graph. And if you're really, really convinced it should be something else, then do an XY scatter graph. So I inserted a chart. Notice I did not select any data and then insert a chart. I inserted a chart without data selected, so my chart is blank. This is what I want. If you select some data and then hit the chart button, you're basically asking Excel to guess what kind of chart you want, which quantities you want on which axes, and so on. So don't do that. Always, always, always insert a blank chart. And then secondary click gets you to this little select data here. There are no data series on here. This box where it says legend entries bracket series, that is empty. There is nothing on here. Every time we click plus here, we are adding a new set of data onto the same set of axes, right? So a different set of points. In this case, we're only going to have one series. So this box here where it says name, that you only need to fill out if you're going to have a legend on your graph. And the rules for legend is super easy. If you have more than one set of points on a graph, you must have a legend. If you only have one set of points on a graph, you must not have a legend. Simple as that. Without a legend, we don't need to fill out that name box. You can if you want, but it's not going to appear anywhere. So X values, I'm going to select them. Go to this little button at the end of the box. And I'm just going to say I want to have displacement on my X. Hang on a minute. No, I don't. I want time on my X, sorry. Not thinking there. So time goes on my X-axis, and then same for Y. Select them, and this is going to be displacement. It is a displacement time graph. We always quote the Y-axis quantity first. Okay, done. There it is. There's my graph. I'm finished. I can turn it in. No. There's a reason why we're doing these graphs. And the reason is because graphs tell us something very important. And not just, oh, they give you a visual interpretation of the data so you can see trends. I mean, that is true, but it's much, much more than that, especially for those of us doing AP. All right, so chart titles are easy enough. What's on the y-axis? Well, displacement. V, what's on the x-axis? Time. And what was it for? It was for a constant motion cart. If you follow that recipe, your titles will always be great, right? So y-axis quantity, displacement, V, x-axis quantity, time, for whatever it was this data was for. We also need to label our two axes, so let's do that. Horizontal axis, in this case, was time, t in seconds. Notice that this mirrors the chart heading up here, time, t seconds, all right? Got to have those three things in there. If you haven't put three things in a title, it is not finished. Vertical title. And this one is going to be displacement delta x in meters. Got to do my little trick with that capital D again. Need to change the font to symbol, turn it into a delta. All right, there we go. Are we done? Nope. We need to put a trend line on here. This is obviously a linear graph, and we also want to choose to display equation on graph. The r-squared value is giving you an indication of how well that trend line fits the data. In this case, it is almost perfect. Right? The closer that r-squared value is to 1, the better the trend line fits through the data. So this is just about perfect. In this case, we don't need to quote that r-squared value. And final step then, here is my equation for the line. This is going to be very useful to us, but it's in a generic form, right? It says y equals something x. And once again, we've got data given to the 10th, 100th, thousandths And that's just silly, right? Because we were not that accurate with our measuring. So we got to change those things. So first of all, I didn't have a generic y, I had something specific. I had displacement, and the symbol I gave to that was delta x. So once again, I'm going to have to do my little symbol trick here. And on the x-axis, I had t for time. And then finally, if my data was to 2 decimal places, I should not have more than 2 in my calculated answers here. So I'm going to take those off. I would have rounded those manually had I needed them to. Okay, so I'm not going to talk here about the implications of this equation. That's something that we'll do in classes and later videos. But it is super important that we have it there. So just have a look at this. If you turn this in, this is going to score you 100 for a data-driven lab. Quick reminder of the key points. 3 things in those title headings. Make sure you address the number of decimal places in your data and make sure it's appropriate. Might not always be 2, it might be 1, it might be 3, but it will depend on your experiment and how you took the measurements. Always, 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 XY scatter graph, never, ever, ever join the dots. Titles and axis titles, trend line, equation for trend line, and we are good to go.